Happy 12th day of Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas to you. You can say it one more time. It's okay. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you.
Depending on where you live and how you count on the days of the calendar, either last night at midnight you held your 12th night festivities, or tonight at midnight you'll hold your 12th night festivities, which, if you were in Victorian England back in those days, would mean major theater that would happen. Or perhaps if in some ethnic communities, last night or tonight is the night that you finally get to open and unwrap all of those gifts that have been piling up under the Christmas tree ever since Christmas began on Christmas Day. If you were a child in one of those families, today is that special day when you maybe get the gifts that you have most hoped for, your favorite gifts. You're ready for them. You're ready to open them. Gifts that we perhaps will never forget. And then there are those gifts of Christmas that we'd like to forget, perhaps. And if you have a sweater like this and it's your favorite, I mean you no offense by any means at all. But this might be the kind of gift that you open up, your wonderful aunt gave it to you. She wanted to keep you warm during the Christmas season and festive, and you opened it up and you said, gee, thanks. It's so wonderful. The wise men, we are told in the story in Matthew's gospel, came bearing gifts. They came bearing gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. They were the oddest of gifts, and yet they were the truest of symbols. Gold, you see, was a gift that you only gave for royalty. Priests were those who used frankincense in the worship of God in the temples. And myrrh. Myrrh was a little more common, but it was often the spice, oil of choice for embalming, for getting one ready for burial. Gold and frankincense and myrrh. As most biblical scholars will kindly note, the Magi's gifts were harbingers of the future life of Jesus. Gold for royalty, the King of Kings. Frankincense for the priest, the one who sacrifices himself on our behalf, the one on the cross and in the tomb, where myrrh will be a spice that the women will bring. And yet, death is overcome. Death in this infant, Jesus, is overcome. You have to wonder what Mary's response was to the gifts from these travelers from afar who showed up at the house with these gifts. If you were with us on Christmas Eve, you heard me explain why the three Magi may have appeared at a house rather than at a barn. Because as we dig and discover and understand housing in the ancient world of that time, we find that those mangers were maybe not out back in a stable, but maybe closer at hand in the house, and the inn was a guest room in that house. And so that room wasn't available, but the main room where the mangers were for the little lambs might have been available. And so in that space come these travelers from afar, bearing gifts for the newborn Jesus. Gifts that Mary must have wondered about their purpose. They might have been gifts that Mary really wanted to say, thanks, but no thanks. Take them back. Take them back. Return them. This means that my son is destined for what the angel told me, for what old Zechariah said, to pierce my own soul. We know what Joseph's response was. Joseph was sitting in the corner and he was tallying up the exchange rate on all these gifts. He's looking at that gold and he's saying, man, this is going to put this kid through college. right here. There's the college fund. And the frankincense, he's thinking, I'm going to be able to provide all the baby food and diapers we need now. And the myrrh, he's thinking, this is probably a good thing that we can pay Aflac or whatever we need to pay for insurance for the football accident that's bound to happen when he's in high school. And so, what is Joseph thinking about these gifts that come in? And we don't know because the story doesn't tell us what their thoughts are about those gifts. Two types of believers read this story. There is the literal believer who would say that the gifts were factual. They actually happened this way and they were obvious prophetic predictions of the future of Jesus. And then another kind of believer, one like me, might look at this birth story of Jesus a little more metaphorical and say, what do these symbolic gifts really have to say to us? Because if they were literal and they were factual, that's fine. They had a meaning then, but what do they have for us today? Because, in fact, if they don't have meaning for me today, then they're meaningless in that sense. They're just an old story. The three Magi, at least we say three Magi, traditionally Melchior and Gaspar and Balthazar. But, the story doesn't tell us how many wise men or kings or Magi, depending on the translation that you read, come to see the baby Jesus. That's another tradition that plants the three on there, only because three gifts are mentioned. So there must have only been three. Well, there could have been a lot of Magi, perhaps. And artists over the years, over the centuries, have captured this tale very differently. In the adoration of the kings, here you see the holy event with angels and all at the house, kind of in the Victorian type expressions of this time in the story of Jesus. And then there's Botticelli's adoration of the Magi from 1500. And in this one, you don't see just three Magi, you see multitude of royalty. Multitudes of royalty who are coming to pay homage to the King of the Jews, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. So artists in our envisioning of this have taken on different views throughout the centuries. We think about this story that we only find in Matthew's Gospel. It's not part of Luke's account of the birth of Jesus, and as we've mentioned before, Mark doesn't have a birth account of Jesus, and John doesn't have a birth account of Jesus. So we just have those two Gospels, and this one, Matthew, is the only one who has the story about these three Magi coming to pay homage to the new King of the Jews, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. Now, most scholarship around the Bible that's tried to study this story thinks that the Magi were likely Zoroastrian priest and Iranian-based monotheistic faith that predated Christianity and modern Judaism. They were the first, however. They were the first in the story to recognize God's work in Jesus. Think about that for a minute. These are people who come from a distant place, who have a religion of their own. A religion that predates the religion of Jesus' own holy family. And yet they recognize God's work in the birth of Jesus Christ. They had an epiphany of what God was doing in Jesus, and they traveled far to check it out for themselves, to see it for themselves. And yet, here's the interesting thing about this story. They leave after they present their gifts, they pay homage, and they don't convert. They don't change their faith. They don't stop their religion. They come, they worship, they honor, and they go back to where they came from, being the people that they were before. Just saying, God has done something good. God is doing something great in this new one, born the King of the Jews, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. You see, perhaps that's because this king, this new king that was born humbly in Bethlehem, this this king is different. This king and this king's realm have no borders, has no boundaries around him. He doesn't have a castle or a keep to maintain. This king is a king of hearts, a lord of all, a prince of real peace. A prince of real peace that, when worshipped, when honored, can unify everyone. Can unify everyone. But when those 3 magi, or 30 magi, or however many of them came into ancient Palestine, and they were looking for the place where Jesus was born, and they did what all good kings do when they travel into somebody else's land. They stop by the appropriate authorities and check in. Hey, look, King Herod, we know you're king. We're in your land. We're not here to have war or do any of that kind of stuff. We just want to go because, this star thing there's prophecies about that, and we think that something new and great has happened, and we want to go check it out. Well, King Herod welcomes them into his land. He doesn't imprison them. He doesn't go to war against them, as kings often would at that time. He doesn't just expel them, but what does he say to them? He says, just, when you find him, you know where he's at, just come back and let me know. Because I want to go and, pay homage to this new king of the Jews. I'm ready. Just let me know. I want to know, right? This king, King Herod, is threatened. He's threatened by those ancient prophecies. It's a threat against him and against his superiors, the Roman Empire. Because in the Roman Empire, you might be appointed a political head of a state like Herod was, who really had absolutely little power. There was power, but not the power that Caesar had. Because Caesar always had power over Herod, just as Caesar had power over Pilate in the Easter story. But this political head, power head, is worried because if this new king of the Jews begins to be the one that everybody is looking after, then Rome is going to come down on him. You see, he's the first one where the buck is going to stop, is with Herod. All right? And so he's concerned. This is a threat. And so we know that the Magi arrive, and they come bearing their gifts, and they present their gifts to Mary and Joseph and Jesus. That's the story we have. And then they're warned in a dream. And one thing a friend of mine said recently in a sermon he preached online is that if you see the word dream in the Bible, pay attention. Something really important is happening there. And that's true. Dreams warn people, they predict, they announce things, they bring messages from God. They're warned in a dream to not return through Herod, but to return another way. It's an act of civil disobedience against Herod. He had told them explicitly, come back and tell me what you find. That is like as if the President of the United States was to tell somebody who was visiting our country, trying to find some, come back and tell me what, this is my demand, this is my law. Come back and tell me what you find. And the Magi resist. And they go off another way. Because they know and they figured out that Herod is just another autocratic ruler who doesn't really care about people, but about his own welfare. His own welfare. You know Herod. Remember, he's the one who threw a temper tantrum when he didn't get exactly what he wanted. A tantrum that yielded the death of innocents. Innocent children who had no political wrangling and no political power in the wrangling of politicians. You see, right here in the beginning of this tiny infant Jesus life, death threatens him and threatens God's love, God's grace, God's hope, God's peace that comes in the Messiah. The very beginning of Jesus' life is filled with a threat on his life. It's a threat that will meet him again and again and again, all the way until it will seem to be victorious when, at the hands of Pilate and the religious authorities, he's crucified on a cross, executed as a criminal of the empire. It will seem to be victorious in that moment, but as Epiphany people, we're also Easter people, and we know the rest of the story. We know that death couldn't keep him in its grip. We know that he truly is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Prince of Peace, and that he has within him love and life that is abundant beyond anything we could hope for or even imagine. And that life was victorious over death. And that abundant life is offered to you and even to me right here, right now, on the 12th day of Christmas. It's an abundant life that African-American theologian Howard Thuman said this about. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the people, to make music in the heart. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you.